Welcome back. Today we were doing a deep dive into something that really sent shockwaves through the international legal world earlier this year. We're talking about Executive Order 1203, signed February 6th, 2025. The title says it all, imposing sanctions on the International Criminal Court.
Yeah, and it's much more than just a statement, isn't it? This is the U.S. government actively using its significant financial muscle and immigration controls against a major international body. And the legal basis they used, declaring the ICC's work an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security. That's a really high bar.
It really is. And that's what we want to unpack for you today. Our mission, if you will, is to look at how this conflict even started, break down the actual tools the president used in this order, and then trace the immediate fallout, especially with key U.S. allies. It's this fascinating intersection of domestic law, international justice, and, well, power politics. Hashtag the context why the ICC became a target.
Okay, so first, just a quick baseline on the International Criminal Court, the ICC. It's based in The Hague, in the Netherlands. Its job is prosecuting individuals, not states, but individuals for the absolute worst crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes.
Right.
But here's the absolute crux of this whole situation. 125 nations are members. They signed the Rome Statute. The U.S., not a member. Israel, also not a member. And both countries have consistently, forcefully rejected the court's authority over their citizens.
And that rejection, that tension, just completely boiled over in November 2024. That was the trigger, wasn't it? When the ICC issued those arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the defense minister at the time, Yoav Gallant.
Exactly. The warrants were for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Gaza conflict. For the U.S. administration, that was seen as a direct challenge, crossing a line. And just a few months later, boom, we get this executive order.
But this wasn't the first time the U.S. pushed back hard against the ICC, was it? There's history here.
Oh, absolutely. During the president's first term, remember, he sanctioned the previous ICC chief prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda. That was specifically because the court was looking into potential war crimes committed by U.S. forces in Afghanistan. So there's a pattern, but that was targeting one person. This EO, 14303, goes much bigger. It targets the entire institution, tries to kind of paralyze its ability to function, at least in certain cases.
You mentioned escalation. The timing also feels significant, early 2025.
Yeah.
There was political maneuvering happening right before this dropped.
Definitely. Just the week before the EO was signed, the Republican majority in the Senate actually tried to pass legislation to sanction the ICC, but that got blocked by Democrats in the Senate. So when the legislative path stalled...
The executive order becomes the tool, faster, more direct.
Precisely, and often much broader in scope than what might get through Congress.
And you found something really telling about how the ICC itself reacted even before the order was official. They saw this coming.
Yeah, this was fascinating. They knew financial sanctions were likely on the table with the new administration. So about a month before the EO was actually signed, the ICC paid its entire staff 3 months' salary upfront.
Wow. So basically trying to get cash out the door before the U.S. could potentially freeze their accounts.
Exactly. It shows how seriously they took the threat. Even the possibility of U.S. financial sanctions can have immediate, tangible effects on an organization's planning and operations. They were bracing for impact. Hashtag the core mechanism what the order imposes.
Okay, let's shift to the order itself, EO 14203. We know it targets the ICC, but what does it actually do? What are the teeth in this thing?
Right, so it uses U.S. domestic law to impose some pretty heavy penalties. The biggest one is probably the financial penalties. The order basically says any property or interests in property of sanctioned individuals or entities that are in the U.S. or held by a U.S. person anywhere, they're blocked, frozen. U.S. companies, U.S. citizens, they're prohibited from doing business with them, transferring funds, exporting goods, anything. It's an attempt to cut them off from the U.S. dollar system, which is, pretty critical globally.
A financial chokehold, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's not just money, it hits movement too, right?
Correct. The second major part is visa restrictions. It allows the Secretary of State to suspend entry into the United States for ICC officials, employees, even their immediate families, if their entry is deemed, quote, detrimental to U.S. interests. So it makes this legal fight very personal for the people working at the court.
Okay, hold on. To do all this freezing assets globally, banning travel, targeting a court in The Hague, the president declared this was an unusual and extraordinary threat and invoked a national emergency. Why go that route? What does declaring a national emergency unlock here?
That's the key legal maneuver. By declaring a national emergency, the president unlocked the powers of IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. IEPA is, well, it's one of the most potent tools a president has for foreign policy. It allows the executive branch to regulate international commerce, freeze assets, block transactions unilaterally and immediately, no waiting for Congress. It gives the president massive, rapid economic leverage. That's why they used it. It weaponizes the U.S. financial system instantly against the target.
And they didn't just set up the mechanism, they named names right away.
Exactly. To show immediate effect, the order explicitly sanctioned the current ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan. He's listed right there in the annex. It's a clear shot across the bow at the leadership. But the order is written broadly, remember. It's designed to potentially target anyone found to be helping the ICC's investigations against, well, certain people. #, the rationale and key definitions.
So the powers are immense. What's the official justification? How does the order explain using these extraordinary measures against an international court?
The main argument boils down to sovereignty and jurisdiction. The order calls the ICC's actions illegitimate and baseless. Why? Because, as we said, the U.S. and its close ally Israel are not parties to the Rome Statute. They never agreed to the court's jurisdiction. And the order adds this defensive layer, asserting that both countries are, quote, thriving democracies with militaries that strictly adhere to the laws of war. The implication being they don't need outside oversight.
And it frames the ICC's work not just as illegitimate, but as actively harmful?
Yes, it portrays the investigation into Israeli officials and the prior one into U.S. actions as setting a dangerous precedent. The argument is that this could endanger U.S. personnel past and present, potentially exposing them to politically motivated legal actions abroad. They also pointed back to existing U.S. law, the American Service Members Protection Act of 2002, the so-called Hague Invasion Act, as precedent for protecting U.S. and allied personnel from the ICC.
Okay, let's really zero in on this term that seems central to everything. Protected person. Who exactly does this order aim to shield?
Right, that definition is critical and, frankly, very broad. A protected person includes any U.S. person, think current or former military members, government officials, elected officials who hasn't consented to ICC jurisdiction, which effectively means all of them since the U.S. hasn't joined the court. If you served in the U.S. military or government, this order says the U.S. will protect you from the ICC.
But it goes further than just U.S. citizens. It protects allies, too.
It does. This is a crucial extension. It also covers foreign citizens from a U.S. ally specifically defined as NATO members or designated major non-NATO allies if that allied country also hasn't consented to ICC jurisdiction.
So this is the mechanism to protect Israeli officials, primarily, given the context of the arrest warrants.
That seems to be the immediate practical application, yes. The U.S. is using its domestic law and economic power to create a shield not just for its own people, but for officials in allied nations like Israel that are currently facing ICC scrutiny. It's essentially exporting legal protection.
And the sanctions target anyone providing financial, material, or technological support for ICC investigations against these protected persons. So the goal is basically to starve these specific investigations of any resources they might need.
That's the strategy, yes. Cut off the funding, the expertise, the data analysis tools, anything the ICC might need from external sources to build cases against U.S. or key allied personnel. It's deterrence through economic strangulation. #, the ripple effect, and global reactions.
And we saw pretty quickly that this order wasn't just going to sit on the books. It was used, and maybe in a way people didn't fully expect initially.
That's right. Fast forward a few months to July 9th, 2025. The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, used the authority from this very EO to impose sanctions, but not against an ICC official. He sanctioned Francesca Albanese,
Who is the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the Palestinian territories. So a UN official, not ICC staff. That's a significant expansion.
It really is. And the stated reason was quite pointed. She was sanctioned for her, again quoting, illegitimate and shameful attempts to push the ICC to act against officials and even companies in Israel and the U.S. They also layered in accusations of anti-Semitism and support for terrorism. But the core justification rested on her trying to engage the ICC mechanism against U.S. allies. It demonstrated that this EO could be used as a tool against pretty much anyone in the international human rights sphere perceived as working against U.S. or allied interests in this specific context.
Okay, so the U.S. is flexing its muscle using this order broadly. How did allies react, especially European allies who generally support the ICC, and the Netherlands, which actually hosts the court?
The reaction from key European allies was uniformly negative. It created quite a bit of diplomatic friction. Take the Netherlands. As the host country, they're in a tough spot. Their foreign minister, Casper Veldkamp, expressed public regret over the EO. He tried to walk a fine line, acknowledging the U.S. position, but firmly stating that the ICC's work is essential in the fight against impunity. And he stressed that the Netherlands would fulfill its treaty obligations to protect the court.
So, diplomatic language, but pushing back.
Mm.
And the EU leadership was even more direct.
Much more. Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, didn't mince words. He called the executive order a direct threat to the court's independence. His argument was broader, that sanctioning the ICC, an institution dedicated to international justice, actually undermines the entire international legal system. So you see this clear split. The U.S. prioritizing its sovereignty, protecting its people and allies above all. The EU prioritizing the multilateral system and international accountability, even when it's uncomfortable. Outro.
So when we step back from this deep dive, what we're seeing is a really powerful assertion of U.S. domestic law onto the international stage, using the extraordinary lever of a national emergency declaration under IEP to shield U.S. and allied personnel from an international court the U.S. doesn't recognize. Its economic powers, foreign policy, pure and simple.
And it's built to be ongoing. This isn't just a one-off sanction. The UA actually requires the Treasury Department, working with the State Department, to report back within 60 days, and presumably regularly after that. They have to identify additional people or entities who should be sanctioned for assisting the ICC in these targeted investigations. So it sets up a continuous monitoring and targeting process.
Which leads to a final thought for you, our listeners. If the whole point here is to shield U.S. and allied officials from international prosecution by designating them protected persons and cutting off the ICC's ability to investigate, what might that do, longer term, to the internal justice systems within those countries? If that external pressure from the ICC is effectively neutralized, does it change the incentives for transparency or accountability within their own military or legal systems? Something to think about as the repercussions of EO 14203 continue to unfold.